I do want to talk about my own experiences working with Activision Blizzard on some of these topics because I started working with them as a freelancer, but I was pretty deeply involved, obviously, with the creation and kind of the day-to-day runnings of the Overwatch League from 2016 up until the end of 2019, basically. And so I'm going to be very careful with what I say. And the reason is because some of these are not my stories to tell. And they did heavily factor into why I left Overwatch League, but I didn't feel that it was right to discuss it at the time. Because again, this particular incident is not my story. There was a pretty, in my opinion, serious incident of sexual harassment while in the later part of when I was at Overwatch League. And the reason why I didn't want to share this publicly, again, not my story, but also I don't want to cause this person to like relive that abuse, and it's ultimately their decision to make the details public. And the reason why I'm bringing this up now is purely to inform people about what my experience was talking to people and trying to get this resolved. So I'm not going to talk about what happened. I will say that no women were involved in this, so it wouldn't have been in this lawsuit. But it was very much an incident of sexual harassment. And I can tell you that what ended up happening, this was after Nate Nanzer left. So don't want anybody to go cast aspersion on Nate. But after this happened, there were at least a dozen witnesses to this, by the way. So it wasn't like an isolated incident. It occurred in a public place. I thought it was pretty egregious. And so I ended up personally going and talking about this incident and expressing deep concern to 7 different people at Activision Blizzard who were this person's superiors or were above them in the org chart. 3 of these people, including the person who was responsible, no longer work for the company. 2 of them do, and 2 of them left voluntarily. I can say that what was supposed to happen was that the people involved in this incident were not supposed to ever interact anymore. I can say definitively that didn't happen. It was not enforced in any way. And so that was pretty egregious in my eyes. And I can tell you that all of my conversations with these superiors ended up in dead ends, whereas I have no idea whether they did anything with HR or not, or if they couldn't comment on HR investigations. But I can say that nothing happened really, and it took over a year for this to be resolved. And as I understand it, in the interim, this same individual then was brought under another sexual harassment complaint that had to be investigated as well. So I found it extraordinarily frustrating that I would literally go to people at the end of 2019 within the Overwatch League, people who are very high up in the company, and say, I am extremely concerned about this. I think that this is horrible and this needs to be resolved. And nothing was done. Absolutely nothing was done. And so when I left, that was a big part of my decision to leave, was because I felt that the whole culture was so rotten at that point in time. And it was creative differences as well. There were multiple factors, but I didn't want to talk about it then because it had no relevance, right, to me leaving. And again, it wasn't my story to tell. And then on the other hand, some of the other incidents that I perceived were occurring at Blizzard. And it's hard for me because I felt that some of the leadership and was so incompetent that it's really difficult for me to tell whether this was sexism or pure stupidity, because there were men who were ignored as well. But my perception was frequently that women that I worked with, and I heard stories from them that I was not party to, so I'm secondhand, that did seem extremely sexist. And also women that I worked with, I felt were actively being ignored in terms of them trying to contribute to the product of Overwatch League, or were not having their like career goals really listened to. And so they were being put in like weird positions that they didn't want to be in, doing work that they said that they didn't want to do. And oftentimes the only remedy to these solutions was me myself going to bat for them and trying to change things. And again, I don't know if it felt like sexism to me. Whether it was or not, I can't be in other people's brains, but I can say that I perceived it very much as disempowering women on their career choices and their viewpoints, even though many of these women had extensive experience and competence within their fields. And it was
By the way, on the thing you said about like when you actually go to the people above them in the org flow chart and like they don't do anything about it, or they bury it, or they sort of fob you off with some shit, I'll look into it, and then maybe they never did anything. One of the concerns I would have in light of this like corporate culture storyline we've been building up is this. I won't use the analogy directly, but I'll make it vague enough. There's a certain religion that has had a lot of problems with certain, also sort of abuse cases, right? And supposedly, I once heard this explanation that made perfect sense. I never thought of it before. Everyone always says, well, it's a religion, those are supposed to be holy people. Why don't they all just out all the people doing all that evil behavior? And I was told basically, well, there are other sexual behaviors that the same religion denounces. And the joke goes like this: at the top level, either they're doing the one literal crime that you're not allowed to do sexually, right? But those people can't be outed by the others because they're doing what just the religion goes against. And the idea is, if you out me, I out you. And so there's like a sort of mutual assured destruction. I get the vibe of that, Monty. I'd love to believe they were just incompetent and they didn't run it through. I would suspect this is what's more likely. Those people are also at the same parties. They know the same scenarios. They probably engaged themselves. And they know, if I call this guy out, what if he is going to get fired from the company? And he turns around and goes, well, fuck it, I'll empty all the silos myself. Here's all the shit I saw you guys getting involved in. So that creates a conspiracy of silence by definition, because people have to keep each other's secrets, as it were. So it's why I do think it's a systemic problem. I don't think it's just the odd person. And I definitely think the thing you said earlier, I hate that, Richard, when the people who are in the games journalism industry try to imply that some 14-year-old kid making an edgy joke is a slippery slope to, oh, I've tripped over and I'm raping people now. Like there's no direct connection between those two whatsoever. They don't even engender each other. Like they're not even there's no causal link between the two.
The problem is taking on the bigger stories and kind of like, you know, casting stones at the bigger entities. Unfortunately, that's hard. It requires a lot of time. A lot of these journalists don't get that luxury. To try and give them some sort of credit. A lot of them are employed in journalism. It's this thing was tweeted, get a rewrite up as quickly as possible, because our rewrite might make it to the front page of Reddit or get circulated on Twitter more than the original tweet did itself. And so as whenever I've been doing these big investigations, I need at least 3 months to kind of get the dirt under my fingernails, and these journalists aren't going to get that luxury. A lot of them haven't had any training, but I mean, ultimately, I'll just say it plain. They are too busy abusing their platforms for petty reasons to settle scores. Essentially, they are the people that were bullied in high school that now have the bully pulpit.
Yes,
that they use to lash out at other people. And you would think, what better target than a powerful man with money and status in the games industry that uses that influence to abuse and demean women. But that avatar doesn't mean anything in their mind. They never went through that. What they did do was have somebody sneer at their clothes or sneer at the choices that they make about how they dye their hair, or maybe they came out as gay at school and there was a lot of snickering behind their backs, and so they settled that score. And that's the level of childishness that's infected what is essentially meant to be the fourth estate for our industry. People always laugh when I say that, because they think it's like this lofty, grandiose assessment of what I believe journalism can do. I've always taken it seriously to that degree. I've never shied away from outing the really, really bad people and showing some sort of clemency, towards people that, as you said, it's like, look, it was 2008, it's 2021, it was a stupid joke. Probably let that slide, right, and go and catch me an actual fucking predator. But no, they don't think that way. So,
dude, it's even built into the whole mythos of why you're supposed to want to be a journalist. It's why all those people at the Washington Post look like morons when they're like, the democracy is dying because my story was called fake news. No, that's not the case. You want it to be like that because that's
you mean Jim Acosta syndrome? Yeah,
that's the movie version of being the journalist. Is the idea that they're going to be fucking threatening to kill me if I publish the story, and it's what people don't want out there. But when they get a chance to actually do it, Richard, like you're saying, they actually come across something that would potentially cost them but could be really important to put out, all of a sudden they don't want to play that game anymore. They put away the pretend LARP journalist outfit and go, I'd rather just be a guy getting paid to say that this game's a 7 out of 10 on the misogyny scale. They don't have any serious fucking work to do. If you're a journalist, right, unless you're, I will say it, games journalist in theory you would have thought would be outside this remit, but as we can see, that's not the modern games journalist, right? In theory, you should be able to be judged by your fucking scars, the actual licks you took to do your work. If you have no scars and everyone in the industry loves you and you're not blacklisted, you're a fucking shit investigative journalist. You never uncovered anything people didn't want. It's like that fucking Orwell quote where it's like, there's just public, they said basically, there's what people don't want printed and everything else is public relations. So think that through if you're a fucking games journalist. Are you there just to sell copies of a new game, or are you actually going to do some stories that matter in your life? You don't have to do them all. If each person did one that could potentially cost them, the whole industry would be cleaned up tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, there's part of me that's sympathetic to some journalists that aren't taking on those bigger stories, or not that they're not taking on the bigger stories, but that are writing these less important stories because they're not choosing to write about, I don't know, some tiny indie game because they're passionate about it. They're doing it because they need the $300 that they're going to be paid if they write the article, and I get that. And I understand that you have to take a risk and write these big articles if you want to actually have a profound impact on this industry that you are in a position to have a really good impact on. And sure, there are risks to it and you will have scars, but wear those as a badge of honor. Who else can do this investigation, get people to speak out that otherwise wouldn't speak out, to give you information and tell their stories in a way that can really impact things and change the entire discussion around it publicly. So it is really disappointing when people aren't doing that. I'm glad some are, but I want to see more, especially in a situation like this when who can say Activision is the good guy here? If you are a writer, a journalist, reporter who has been too afraid to speak out against the big guy in the past, now is a perfect opportunity. Now is a time to get those, social media points that we were talking about earlier that you will get by globbing on this. That shouldn't be your motivation, but it goes to show that you're unlikely to really lose much, at least in the eye of your audience. You will lose some credibility.
I think the thing that really is disheartening is, and I don't like naming names ordinarily, but I think a lot of people consider that, Jason Schreier to be sort of like the last great games journalist. And, he's a published author as well as a journalist. And he himself came out saying, the gamers are spreading rumors that I was sitting on the story about Blizzard. He came out today and he said, here's the truth. I've been actively investigating it for years. And he'd heard rumors and anecdotes, but could never corroborate enough for an article for various reasons. And he says that happens often. Absolute nonsense. If you are pursuing an active investigation for years and you don't have enough to get it over the line, and you can't just present you're no kind of journalist. It should become apparent 3 months in what you've actually got, what you're looking at. If you're actively pursuing something, all told, with the big story that everyone thinks is the only story I broke, with to prove that I by Power fixed that match in CSGO, it was 6 months from start to finish. But in that time, I had everything. I mean, absolutely everything. So the idea that this, by the way, which in 2.5 years, the government departments are notoriously inefficient, right? The Department of Fair Employment has been able to find all of this evidence, salary tables, all these anecdotes. As soon as that story dropped, there was another 20 anecdotes or so public. I've been collating them all. Blizzard forced into a response. You're telling me you investigated this story for years and couldn't get it over the line. Sorry, don't buy that for a second. And if that is true, you're fucking incompetent. Investigative journalism is not your forte. You should really stick to writing puff pieces for these big companies that you profess to hate.
Want to see more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, be a pleb and don't.